Aloha, Ulavinaka, Maloanele, Hafade, Kiora, and Talofa. Welcome to our cultural home. Here at Utopia, Washington, our mission is to create sacred spaces to strengthen the minds and bodies of our queer and trans-Pacific Islanders, or Cutie Pie, through community care, community organizing, culture stewardship, and civic engagement.
Our vision is to create a world of cultural wealth, dignity, healing, and liberation for all cutie pies that honors our ancestors, future generations, and ourselves.
We are so honored you could join us to Talanoa. You might be wondering, what is Talanoa? Well, I'm glad you asked. Talanoa is building conversations. It is the ability to have an open discussion about any given topic. As a people whose history has been passed down orally, many Pacific Islanders continue to utilize this traditional tool to increase awareness, educate, and find solutions about issues that impact our community. Tala means story, and Noa means to tie or bind. Through Talanoa, we are able to connect our stories, bringing together community for meaningful conversations by weaving our experiences together.
Talanoa aims to provide a cultural space to talk about critical issues that impact our community. It is through Talanoa that we are able to educate community by providing an in-depth understanding and insight that will support the collective growth of our people. We invite you now to attend this month's Talanoa session. We are so excited to have you. From all of us here at Utopia, Washington, Fa'afetai Te Lava.
Thank you for being here.
Apologies. Talofa and good evening, everyone. Utopia, Washington, and myself would like to show our respect and acknowledge the traditional lands of the Muckleshoot people, past and present, on which this meeting takes place. The Muckleshoot Indian tribe, located in South King County, is the Seattle area's federally recognized Indian tribe and successor to Duwamish and Upper Puyallup peoples who were party to the treaties of Point Elliott and Medicine Creek. Thank you all so much for joining us this evening. I'm very excited to bring this Talanoa to your screens. Before we begin, I'd like to start with introductions. My name is Falefia Jr. Brandon Fomatu. You can call me Brandon. I am a male presenting Fa'afafine of Samoan and Chinese ancestry. I work in production and development for Utopia, Washington. Tonight, our Talanoa centers around uprooting Blackness and anti-Blackness and ending intergenerational trauma. Tonight's panel consists of amazing individuals who live in the intersections of identity that are very important to all of our communities, who are very visible to our communities and do a lot of great work. I would also like to acknowledge that I myself am not African American, I am not Black. I am here to facilitate this discussion and to help guide it, but I am in no way a voice for the Black community. I am here just as many of our communities are here tonight to learn, specifically through the shared stories and lived experiences of our panelists, and to celebrate in their unique identity, their lived experience, and everything that they have to bring to the table. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce our panelists tonight. We have Ibo Martin, Natia Manaya, Kevin Ipopo, and Devin Scott.
Hello, everyone. My name is Ibo Barton. I use they, them, or he, him pronouns. I'm a transmasculine, non-binary, Black and Filipino poet, artist, and educator. I'm happy to be here with you all. Thank you so much for having me.
Hi, I'm Natia Manaya. I identify as she, her pronouns. I work with communities in school and Tacoma Public Schools. Nice to be here.
We can go to Devin and then Kevin.
Oh, hi. Sorry. I was trying to unmute it. My name is Devin Scott. I'm 27 years old. I'm born and raised in Tacoma, Washington. I work at the area hospital for local psychiatric care, and I'm excited to be here.
Hey, talofa love, everyone. My name is Kevin Apopo. I use all pronouns. I currently live in the traditional land of the Kalapuya, Atfalari, and Confederated Tribes of Grand Ronde in what is colonially known as Tigard, Oregon, but originally from Tacoma, Washington. I'm of Black American and Samoan descent, and I really appreciate everyone's time tonight.
Awesome. Thank you all so much for taking the time out to be here with us tonight and to share in our Talanoa. A little icebreaker to start. A quick question. I'm sure everyone has seen it. And if not, your thoughts are still welcome. What are your thoughts on the iconic Super Bowl performance? And what is something that you appreciate that Black culture and Black people have brought into both your lives, our lives collectively? Anyone, we can popcorn this. Anyone can go.
What if you didn't watch the Super Bowl performance?
Wait, who didn't watch it?
I didn't watch the performance. I didn't. Gosh, so sue me, guys. Sorry. I heard it was great. I heard it was very nostalgic. So, yeah. Anyone who's watched it can have an opinion on it.
I gotta admit, I also did not watch it, but I will say that social media exploded about it in many different ways. And one of the things I think that Black folks bring to American culture is the culture, right? As we saw, Snoop Dogg and Mary J. Blige and Eminem and Dr. Dre are all part of, maybe not Eminem, but are all part of this culture that was created, and movements that were created by these folks, largely out of Black communities, right? And so, and everyone followed along, and there was, and this is what happens. Conversation happens, debate happens when Black art gets put up for national distribution in this way, right? And so I think that we've contributed so much to American culture, just as the culture in general. Like, Black folks are the culture, right? And so it's interesting to see when stuff like that happens also. Especially during NFL, which is also a controversial Black topic, right? Like the way in which we have Black players and white owners, and this sort of replication of oppression that ends up happening. But again, I also didn't watch it, but I do see the importance, I guess, of it.
Anybody else want to chime in before we move on?
I thought that was a very good answer to input. I did watch it, and I thought it was a very good show. I thought it was something that I was expecting to see. And I was also expecting some of the backlash on social media and also other political websites on what their views were about it. And it's just so interesting to see that even though these artists that came from many generations and grew up just like the rest of us, that had made the extra effort to become someone, is still getting that backlash of things that they originally grew up from and was taught, let alone learned. So just to see that, I mean, it's kind of disappointing, but very interesting, and just because that we, as myself, expect of what's coming from original music, of what Dr. Dre was playing on the piano, and I guess he was told not to play some keynotes on the piano, to Eminem taking a knee and the officials telling him not to take a knee. So it's very aspiring just to see these artists still break those barriers and say, hey, I understand where you're coming from, but this is something that I'm coming from. This is something I'm representing for my family and anybody else that represented me along the way.
Right on. Thank you guys for those inputs. Yeah. Um, I watched part of it. I watched some of it. I didn't watch the whole thing. But yeah, especially what Ebon and Devin had to bring to the table about the performance. I think overall, we can all agree it was a very large celebration of Black artistry and of Black resilience, but also not just resilience, because that word is tiring to a lot of our communities, especially the Black community. But you see how these, as Devin has said, how these artists are thriving and how they are like literally staples of culture, both intergenerational, right? We've all seen these artists grow up, but also I think it was really awesome to see the recognition of the generational appreciation, like our parents appreciating these artists and older generations being like, yeah, this is what a halftime show should look like. So yeah, positives and negatives to the reactions. A lot of the hate was from community who probably can't even clap on the right beat. So like, let's not even go there. But let's move on to our first question of the evening. Let's do this. All right. So, anti-Blackness is a common word used in nonprofit and social justice settings, as all of you know who've worked in nonprofit and have experience with the term and with organizational work. As I'm sure you're all familiar, but for someone that is new or foreign to the work and to the term anti-Blackness, when we mention anti-Blackness, what does it mean to you, and what are some examples? Maybe we can start with Devin, and we'll go to Ibo.
All right. This all questions that were provided were a little tricky to answer, just because I don't want to really get too deep into it to where I'm, touching feelings or anything like that. So I tried to keep it as broad as I could. But I felt that this term anti-Blackness meant that it was excluding an ethnicity from any environmental situation, whether that be social, financial, health, education. Even though the term is introduced now, I still feel that this is something that's been going on for decades.
So anti-blackness, what does it mean to me? So I think that anti-blackness for me is this constant expectation of a stereotype created by either by society or by whatever influences or informs folks' information. But I think that one of the ways in which I'm often noticing anti-blackness show up is the constant undermining of Black leadership and Black wisdom, especially Black knowledge and experience, especially those who are in feminine bodies, and how, and even in within our own communities, there's this like internalized anti-blackness that happens as well, that's informed by white supremacy, right? Like that is created to make sure that we are still at odds with each other, so there's never a constant building up. So I think that anti-blackness is there's just so many, it's multi-layered, right? There's so many ways in which it can show up and harm folks.
Thank you. Yeah, I love those answers. And I do want to say to Devin and to all four of our panelists, feel free to go deep. Feel free to hurt some feelings. I think as someone who has been around the discussion of what Blackness looks like both in my community, but also within the African American community, specifically in American context, a lot of times the conversation doesn't go in the right direction, either because we make light of it or we easily say like, oh, well, I have Black friends, or the Pacific Islander community and the Black community have been hand in hand. But the conversation never goes deeper than that, right? There is a lot of anti-Blackness within our communities, both brown and Black, but also anti-Blackness from all fronts. And I think like I was hesitant to when I was being asked to host this because I have some feelings about anti-Blackness within my community. I think there's a lot of ignorance. I think there's a lot of refusal to educate. And there's a lot of passing of Black culture as brown culture, as Pacific Islander culture, and it's not right and it's not fair, and it's 2022. Like, what the hell? But again, when it comes to this Talanoa, we're here to share our stories. We're here to elevate and educate, but we need to cut it out. And so, like, I'm grateful for you all being here, and I'm grateful for the answers that you gave. And yeah, I think speaking on behalf of Utopia, we are constantly trying to elevate our analysis and elevate our position to put Black bodies and Black voices at the very front of our work. I think the first time I heard this was from my roommate, Brandon Zacardeno, who has a background in liberation theology. Liberation for Black people is liberation for all of us. And I think that is not said enough, and it's not put at the forefront of our work enough. On a general, broad statement for all organizations, especially those who are led by POC, by BIPOC people, by genderqueer, trans communities. Like, Blackness exists within all of those circles, and I think like it's beyond time that we are able to move forward by centering those voices, centering those experiences to then liberate all of the work that we're doing. So thank you for those answers. I'd like to move on to our second question of the evening. The subject of anti-Blackness and racism in schools and in communities and families, like I stated previously, sometimes it's often not spoken about and it's not addressed enough. What actions can be taken for young people, for young folks, adolescents to young adults, to create and exist in a liberated space? And what does liberation in education, both formal and personal, look like to you? I think let's for this question to Natia and Kevin. Maybe we can start with Kevin and head to Natia.
Yeah, thank you, Brandon. Appreciate it. I think, especially for young folks, we have a unique positionality that allows us to address anti-Blackness in our families and in school settings because we're exposed to more, right? Like, a lot of our parents and family members come straight from back home and then they come here. And because of like different cultural functions, because of our belief in like the spoken word and our positionality to the United States as like a powerful entity, I think a lot of older generations have a more difficult time questioning practices like anti-Blackness because it's seen as like the culture, right? They're like, I'm not being racist, I'm not being anti-Black, like that's just how we do things. But for young folks especially, we know that that's not the case, right? And I don't want to generalize and say that older generations all believe the same way, right? There are a lot of folks who are older who are aware of the intricacies of anti-Blackness within Pacific communities, but especially for young people, right? Like, so much of our generation are folks who have Black ancestry now. Or if you go back to the 80s, to the 70s, when like Pacific Islanders were first coming to the United States, there wasn't as many folks who had mixed lineage, and I think that caused like big separations within the community. If you're wanting to work towards liberation, I think the biggest thing is being comfortable challenging, which can be really hard, right? So much of our cultural practice is built into respecting your elders, respecting their words, and these things, and it can be hard to find that middle ground where you're still respecting your family, but also able to address a lot of the problematic things that they do. I think I've been in a really lucky position in my family where I'm one of the younger folks who has a very strong voice. And because of that, myself and my other Black family members were able to get together and actually host sort of a workshop with everyone else and talk about our experiences, talk about pieces of the language, and talk about practices that were really problematic. And that was a few years ago. And since then, we've seen some pretty big improvements within our family, right? And it takes a lot of courage and a lot of practice to be able to hold a conversation like that. But it's ultimately something that we really need, right? And when we're talking about liberation and education, I think this is a really hard question, right? I think personally, the first step is starting to undo some of the colonial trauma that academia imposes on you, right? Like, what is learning? What is being? What is science? Like, what is math? All these things, right? We have a very clear and westernized white approach that's given to us. And it can take a lot of time and a lot of support from community to figure out how to recognize the validity in traditional practice or and practices that aren't seen as like normal. Um, but for folks in the Black community, folks in Samoan and other Pacific Islander communities, we know that there are ways that we teach and learn that aren't common in a Western society, right? And so, really focusing in on that and what that could mean for formal spaces, right? Like a lot of people would say that this Talanoa is a formal space because of the way that we're hosting it. But in that same sense, if you just Talanoa with your aunties and they tell you their stories, right? Like, why is that not considered formal education? Like, what are the parameters around what that has to be? So I think some of that challenging and reframing can go a long way.
Awesome. I love it. I love it. Natia?
I was trying to figure out how to unmute. I'm thinking about my job right now because right now I work in a public school, and it's a widely diverse public school. And just like this month has just been like a war with like staff, and like we have like majority of our student population is Black, and for me, my work is to tackle like social emotional, and I think that not only is it supposed to be about like personal connections with the students, like in my classroom, I want the kids to know that I've created a space where they can have conversations about race, they can have conversations about gender and expression, and that is not for other rooms, other classrooms. That's not for the school entirely. I think it also goes with visuals. The school, there's a lack of visual representation of any type of culture for the students. I think that's so important, especially for like the majority, for the masses. I hear like the last 3 months, I've been hearing from like Black students that they don't feel valued, they don't feel seen. And I had the opportunity to change bulletin boards around, and one of them was like a board that just discussed Black empowerment, that Black lives truly matter, Black is beautiful, and just going on the list of Black men, Black women, Black children, Black transgender folks, I was like, we all matter. And that was such a huge issue, and I think that's an action that needs to take place in like a lot of different spaces. Is there needs to be someone who's like active on making that a priority. And for me, that's a priority because I really want my kids to feel valued. And right now, that board was taken down twice by staff who just so they feel offended by it. And of course, they were. I think they replaced it last week with like an All Lives Matter posters, and I'm just like, are you kidding me? And then they're not understanding what's wrong with that. And I was like, you're dismissing students, you're devaluing them. I was like, you're saying that our students are all on an equal playing field when they're not. I was like, they're not. Some of them, we don't know what goes on at home. We don't know what happens to them. And I was like, and everything is, I don't know what happens based on there's just a lot, there's just so much that goes on. And I was like, to put something up like that and to replace something that was supposed to be empowering, I was like, oh, it just pisses me off. And so the poster that they actually ripped out of mine, I picked up all the pieces, even stuff that was ripped up, and I put it up inside my room. And I was like, oh, I want all these people to know when they walk by my room, the people that were all offended and whoop-de-woo. I was like, it's right there. We're not going anywhere. I make it very known to my kids when I see them. I was like, your artwork is still here. I was like, I see you. I value you. Just having conversations. And doing that, I was like, it really brought me to get closer to the kids. They're like, yeah, that's like talking to them. They're like, yeah, that's fucking dope, Miss Tia. I was like, yeah, because I think I love you guys. I was like, that's what the school needs. We need people like that's just the actions that should be done. It's like especially in education, it just needs to go forth with just being open-minded and just spreading love. I was like, that's not the All Lives Matter shit is not spreading love. I was like, at all. And gosh, I think it's just one issue, this one fucking bulletin board caused this whole mayhem with like staff. And I work in a building with majority white staff members, which is not, it's very common here in Washington. And it's always like having that conversation with them. They're like, well, I don't know. I feel like I might ruffle some feathers. Girl, I don't give a shit. I do not care. I was like, if I learned from my coworkers at the last school I worked with, because it was really diverse, I was like, if you're not pissing people off, you're not doing enough work. And so for me, it's like, yeah, it's just a visual, and then just having conversations. I love my kids, and that's just the best example I could use for what we need to do. The work that needs to go is just making sure that our kids and people are seen and valued, and listening to their stories, hearing what they have to say, and not judging them, and picking out resources if there's something that they need. I was like, lend a helping hand, and be open to criticism. Like when the board first came up, there was a teacher who was upset. I addressed it, because I'm not one of those people who just was like, who hides away. I addressed it right then and there, and I was like, she was like, we need to modify that. I was like, okay, like whatever works, like we can do that. And then of course modified it a week later. She's pissed about the same issue that's no longer there. And then, these people they don't even talk to me about it. And I was like, what you scared for? I was like, there's no reason to. Is that we need to change the school culture. For me, I'm working on changing the school culture. I was like, we need to be open to criticism, but we also need to be, you need people inside your life that's going to keep you accountable and say, yeah, you fucked up. It's like, and I feel like what's in schools, I was like, that's so important, because this is a place of learning. Especially I work in a middle school. I was like, they're at the age where they're not fully developed, but they have a sense of self. And I was like, we need to really make that a priority, that these kids, when they get out to the real world, I was like, at least if they can know that they felt seen and respected and valued, and like somebody was listening to them, instead of dismissing them, instead of them writing them off, or like just telling them that, you're just angry, you're just lazy. I was like, interesting. There's a lot of conversations that happen in the school, and like talking to folks. And like, I'm one of those people who I just started. I'm like, oh, that's not okay. We're not doing that. I was like, yeah, that's just me. I think that's just the work that needs to be done. And I'm looking back at the question just in case I missed anything, and that would be liberation and education. I don't know. For me, I'm thinking like liberation education just means like, I'm trying to think of like if you're going to school, like you don't have to, like you feel like you have like so much support, where like education could be your top priority, like instead of other factors that are coming in. Like I like when I think of my kids, I think of so much things that they have, like that doesn't work for them. They have teachers who do things out of spite. They have teachers who don't see them, who just argue with them, or just like get on them for stuff that happens outside of the classroom. I was like, for me, liberation education would be like, they're fully supported, and that they can come into a space and like be able to work and know that there's somebody there that's backing them up in like every single classroom that they go in every single place that they move to, so that they can really, get to know the coursework and stuff, and that's just education, Again, my job is really just to focus on social emotional and academics as well. But right now, social emotional is just like my first top priority. I was like, a lot of these kids are coming from backgrounds that, I have no personal experience in. And, I don't need to have personal experience in it. I just need to come and just embrace them with them. And I think, if you're in a school that embraces you for everything that you are, I was like, shouldn't you feel liberated to do something? Like, isn't that liberating? And yeah, that's my rant. That's my opinion. So,
Well, thank you both. I think you've both tackled and
I
spoken a
kind of
lot
want
of.
to piggyback off of that
Oh,
one too.
please
mhm,
do. Yes, Devin.
yeah.
I thought those were really great arguments to have and to be aware of as well. And I think just kind of piggyback off of Natia um, and just looking at standpoint, it's true. A lot is trying to be open-minded with that individual.
Mm.
Individual may be with um, only focusing on the children is that a lot of our so hard and set in stone for that child. Well, this is the way my mom and dad taught me, so this is the way you need to learn as well. And not really understanding that child that is trying to be different and trying to be creative in such a way that maybe that this isn't the right way or not as a good way to do it. Let's try something different. And I think a lot of that is missed in the childhood setting or the kid teen setting is just because it's all ignored. And it later spirals down into a domino effect of into adulthood of why this person has this type of trauma. Well, we look back at it and we see these signs what this child or what this person was trying to do when they were a child and how much it was ignored. Look how much that it's traumatized this person and turned them into be so spiteful and feel even into even have the toxicities that we should all have equally. And just throwing education out there, education should be something fun that we should go to, but with all the ways that we are taught in the school setting as well as when we go home and the way we're taught, it seems like we're so singleized or I guess tunnel visioned in a way to where anything that we think of to try and help better ourselves is something that we shouldn't do in the long run and it's not beneficial for us. And all in all, it's just trying to understand yourself. And I think a lot of that is missed just because we are not understanding that that individual is just trying to understand and receive the perception of what's going on around them, as well as how to respond in those types of situations appropriately without hurting anybody else, as well as themselves. So I think that part and that stage of life is a critical area. And going back to the school setting, I think just because of all of these history textbooks that we learned is just so one-sided, we really didn't take the time to see, well, even though this person thought of this strategy or invented this person, we really never looked at the person, helped that person, and 9 times out of 10, it was color. And yeah, that's really what I had to say about that. But I thought I was compelled to answer on that part too, because it's so scary in a way. It's scary, but interesting how we really advertise mental health and how it's so much needed in ways to support it, but also ignore the steps leading up to that status of mental health of where they need help. It's just a scary but interesting period of that time, especially in the school setting and care setting, just because of those two common factors and how they can add up to each other into one.
Yes. Yes. I love that. Thank you. I
Yeah.
Everything that was said is amazing. It can be, and we're making ways to implement these steps, right? Kevin talked about, cultural education and the education that comes from the cultures that we're brought up in and their validity. As Devin said, not all of our histories are taught correctly. Not all of our histories are taught in whole, and sometimes they're ignored altogether. Um, Me personally, I remember in middle school, I never did not go to school. There's like one day in middle school where I called out sick. I was actually sick, so I stayed home. And the next day I go to school, and my friends were all like, "Oh, Brandon, you missed it." I was like, "What I miss?" They're like, "We went over Samoa yesterday." And I was like, "You went over all of my country and my history in one day, in the entire 365 days of our world history our world history class? That's I at the time I was like, oh damn, I missed a really good day. But like looking back, I'm sure we can all relate in that our histories aren't taught, and especially our education systems, they're getting better, but obviously through history we know that the education system in America, especially, started out very segregated. Also, was not meant for anyone of color, and it was those of us who came before us who made the changes. Who were the very first to go to school? The first black woman, the first black man to go into these schools and hold their head up high. Um, I'm really bad at names, but I believe the first woman either in Washington or to go to school in a like to go to a public school, an all white school, is still alive. Like that's how recent the history is, and we're not taught this in schools. And Natia bringing up the fact that like liberation in education looks like none of these issues coming up in education, right? We can be worry free about our youth going into these schools and feeling fully supported, fully the ability to become fully developed individuals. And then oh, I'm sorry, I just like as you guys were all saying things, I'm just like, why are we not doing this already? Why are these not being implemented in our schools? And obviously we see some states and countries who aren't there yet, who are still trying to ban language that let us see ourselves in education. And so but it's people like you who are like alive and here today who inspire. I mean, Matia, you're in our education system right now. So I have no doubt that you're probably a favorite teacher and you're making all the moves for all of our students to be able to be seen, be heard, be validated, and for you to fight back against the bullshit.
A lot. Yeah.
Awesome. Awesome. Thank you so much for your input on that question. Um, on a slightly lighter note, because I know something about all of you, but I'm excited to know more. And so our next question is to quote the ever amazing and the beautiful Marsha P. Johnson. She once said that history isn't something you look back at and say it was inevitable. It happens because people make decisions that are sometimes very impulsive and of the moment, but those moments are cumulative realities. I think we can all agree and that we all live in these intersections of identity in which it may not have been the easiest to come into, but I see all four of you as very proud individuals, very outspoken individuals who have a very good self-sense of identity. And so while racial trauma and Black identity are very heavy topics, ones that we are going to continue to talk about, would you also please share a moment in your life of triumph and of pride in your Black beauty, your Black foundation, your Black fullness that has really helped shape who you are? Something I think is very important is visibility. And outside of the cisgender heterosexual identities, we exist outside of those, and I think it's important for youth to see that, to see the thriving that can happen there. So I'd love for all of your takes on this question and to share something beautiful about yourselves. Maybe we can start with Ivo. We'll go to and then popcorn it.
A moment of triumph in my Blackness is the question. I think it's interesting as being a Black person in America, where sometimes getting up in the morning is a triumph, and facing the day, right? Because you know what you're going to experience after that moment. And that goes hand in hand with being a Black trans person in America as well, right? Like it's so there's this idea that there's this success of making it through the day, getting up in the morning, and then also those tiny little moments, like when I published my book, Like a book for one of us is a book for all of us, and I'm going to say that over and over and over again. And so there's that. Or when one of my young folks graduates high school, right? Like that is such a big triumph, and it's like you get to have that is yours, and that diploma is for all of us. Thank you for doing that. And so so it's interesting in that way. And then also when I do my gratitude, my daily gratitude, it is often that everything I have and everything I am is from BIPOC artists in Seattle, right? And so that gratitude of folks being there and being in that capacity for me to grow and evolve as the person that I am, and being grateful for their bodies and who they are. And it sort of goes with your representation thing too, right? Where it's like all of these people represented someone to me and held that ground for me to be able to stand in who I am. So honestly, anytime I'm doing gratitude, I'm like, holy crap, all those people stayed alive, and then now I'm alive, and that's awesome, So I would love to popcorn it to Kevin.
Yeah, thank you, Ibo. I really appreciate your answer. So beautiful. And Brandon, I appreciate this question as a nice change of gears from something so heavy. I think most recently on Monday, actually, I was able to. I'm also a poet. I don't know if I said that earlier, but Ibo, love to collab, read some of your work sometime. But yeah, also a poet, and I had an opportunity to collaborate with several other Black poets on a conference coming out in April called Black Literature versus the Climate Emergency. And so a lot of my climate work has been informed by my identity as a Samoan, right? Like we're all aware of the impending climate change and how that's affecting the islands back home. But I haven't had as much opportunity to explore that through like the lens of being a Black American. And I think this was like an opportunity that really pushed me to think about myself in those intersections, right? I felt like for so much of my life, I've had to be someone, or I had to be Black, or I had to be a poet, or I had to be a student, or I had to be an organizer. And there are very few spaces that were able to acknowledge all parts of myself, and few spaces in which I felt all encompassing. And I think, yeah, just being able to write from that perspective and really explore that part of myself that I didn't have as much opportunity to felt really wonderful. And also just an opportunity to be humbled by some amazing Black poets, right? Like other folks in the room were absolutely incredible. And my journey through writing has been lonely at times, right? Like I didn't start writing until a few years ago. And it's been a very like individualized experience. And so any opportunity I get to check in with folks, hear what they're writing, um, get feedback on the process is always amazing for me. And it always means so much more when I'm in a room full of my people, right? And yeah, I think that was just big for me. And even later in the week, still feeling a lot of that energy. But yeah, I'd love to pass it to Natia.
You would think this computer is a touchscreen. Thank you, Kevin. Oh gosh, celebrating my. I was in the protests in 2020 in Capitol Hill, and for me, I always say that this is like my most like. It's just such a big moment for me. Like Kevin said, it felt like there was always a choice. Like there was always like something where we had to pick either being someone or being Black. It was like one or the other. It never really felt like in unison. But being there and holding hands with like other women of color and the speeches that were given, like it's really been us at the forefront. I really felt it. Like I really felt like I was like, okay, I'm coming into. I feel like a part of this community as completely. I don't feel like I have to pick and choose. And I grew up very like you had to pick. And sometimes I am dismissed because it's always like, you're not Black enough. I get that. And I'm like, I was like, and for me to be a part like of just that whole year, just that whole span of just like being down in the forefront, which is just beauty, just celebrating beauty and just celebrating us and like being there and just fighting for us. And I was like, I'm not here to support. I was like, yeah, I was like, my life matters. I was like, my brothers, my sisters, like, I really thought I felt so seen. I felt so valued. I was like, oh my gosh, this is more. I'm like, I can't, like, there's no really words to speak about of like, on just how beautiful and just how wonderful I felt. I mean, granted, we were there, like, but just being there and just seeing people that saw me for like who I was and just being able to just say it, like, I am a Black American. Yeah, and that was like that was such a big moment for me. I really felt it. I was like, I don't know what else more to say. I was like, I felt it all. I was like, it just felt, yeah, to be trans, to be a woman, to be multiracial. Yeah, it was dope. It was an experience that I'm not gonna like. I would never forget. And last but not least, Mr. Devin Spot.
Oh, I wonder if Devin's having connectivity issues. Devin, are you still with us? Oh, I don't think so. Okay. We'll catch Devin after our intermission. But I would like to thank the first of you for giving such beautiful answers. You're also damn cool. I am excited for all the work that you guys are doing, both personal and professional, but also like I know that this is just the start of where you are, of all the things that you're capable of. So I'm grateful for your answers, but also just like I feel really cool like sitting next to y'all. We're going to take a slight intermission. We get the very beautiful privilege of hearing one of Igbo's spoken word. And then when we get back, we'll have Devin answer the question before we move on. I think that's what we're going to do.
Hello, everyone. My name is Igbo Barton, and I use they, them, or he, him pronouns. I would like to share a poem with y'all that I wrote as an ode to a 90s R&B musician named Tevin Campbell. And it's called An Open Letter to Tevin Campbell from the Queer Future, or Tomorrow, a Better You, Better Me. A Diplo decade before you spun our cross-colored overalls round and round. Before Ashley Banks ever had a birthday, free love was a disco ball, and sexuality was spread thin across our sweaty skin, kissing everyone on the dance floor. And in 2021, Can We Talk for a Minute shows up on an oldies playlist. Your voice serenading an awkward inner tween inside of me, and I tell my friends, between nostalgic blushing and recalling a 7th grade daydream, that the 1970s could have held you better. Could have hustled a haze over you, nestled you safe between the glitter and all that polyester. But how dare I cherish secret like safety? Like I'm not out loud and proud every day. Like I don't decorate myself in the culture, twist my tongue around the language. Like I have a right to build an imaginary closet around you. And in 1991, we cared way too much about who your voice could have been for and less about how breathtaking your voice was. So we demanded an answer that you did not even have yet, a language we nor you could even speak. And I don't know what they want you to do, Tevin. I've been living in the queer future. Here, we only dream of where we don't still question and demand impossible evidence from women and children and allow whom they've accused to continue singing along to our most precious moments. Like we can compromise our values for an album, for a TV show, but only when they are straight men, only when their sexualities force themselves into our parties. They rebend their names like classic, fit easy into our mouths like buffet plate.
but we've been ready to drink the holy water in the fires of hell that Lil Nas X found home in, because we've been told that that's where we'll end up so many times. In the queer future, we could love you. We have no titles, only beautiful bodies. We bathe ourselves glorious, take turns licking the shame off each other's backs. We suck glorious from each other's bottom lips. We celebrate the sex we have and the sexy we are. We kiss each other softly under moonlights, Frank Oceaning our way to joy. We dirty computer talk, and Kaylani said, you should be here, Tevin. But I'll never forget that it was you that told us question mark babies that we could go anywhere that we want. Any road that we decided to take. All we needed was our precious dreams, and we did. And so now we dance, we grind out loud, we speak, we sing, we live, and it is not perfect. But, Tevin, maybe I am the fool they call me to believe that sometime in this queer future that we are ready to love you forever. Thank you.
And we are back. That was a spoken word again by the amazing Evil Barton. Before we have Devin answer the last question that we left off with, I would just love to ask for some context and background and inspiration behind that spoken word, if you wouldn't mind.
Yeah, absolutely. So it was my love letter to Tevin Campbell. For any 90s babies that are out there. When I say 90s babies, I mean those born in the 80s and experienced the 90s.
Okay, never mind. Okay.
Eva said none of us.
Okay.
But yeah, so those that are familiar with Tevin Campbell, and I think something interesting that happened to Tevin is that he did this interview in which he disclosed that he was trisexual, and in terms of I would try it. I would try anything, basically, right? As sort of a joke. And I think that as a people, we just canceled him for that. And it was in a time that, gayness and queerness were not accepted in the same way, right? So immediately what I wanted to do was put Tevin in this like 70s bubble of, polyester and disco balls and sexuality that was, question mark in that time. And I was like, but how dare I put somebody there for safety while I am out loud and proud every single day? And what is it about our culture that turns off a Black man that way? Right. And so because Elton John did fine. Right? Like Elton John was fine and we all knew and it was okay. Right. Liberace was fine. And so what is it that we do to BIPOC folks, specifically Black folks, when we add this extra identity to them and have them represent us?
Thank you so much. Yeah, that was fire. Thank you so much for the inspiration. Yeah, for those of you at home, if you're interested in writing, start writing. I mean, did that not just, I want to go write something. It'll probably be crap, but I'm going to just start.
I want to say that it probably won't be crap. It'll be crap to you, maybe. Because you are your own worst critic. But I think that like the most important thing about poetry is that we all become our own historians, just like we were talking about earlier, right? Is that the killer doesn't get to write the story in the story that I write. I get to write that story, right? So anyway, I just encourage you to try it. You might love it.
We'll do love it. I think Devin is having some connectivity issues. So while we wait for Devin to come back, I think we'll move on to the next question. And then we'll circle back because I definitely do want to hear Devin's input. So the next question is one that I was not afraid to put in there. Um, as Pacific Islanders, anti-Black and racial trauma show up in our cultures just as much as solidarity and support for Blackness and the Black community. How do we combat this trauma and keep community accountable? And what do we as PI folks need to do better to be better supporters and stand in solidarity? Um, this question is for Natia, Kevin, and Devin. So we can go ahead and maybe start with Natia.
I was like, do you want to put us on which question is number 5, right?
Number 4. Oh, but Devin is back. Devin, are you hearing us?
Can you guys see me? Can you hear me?
Yes.
Ooh, I'm not sure what's going on. I am so sorry. I had it hooked up to the Ethernet cord, and it just was running just as slow. And so I have it on the Wi-Fi, and I'm sitting right next to it, like the modem's right here by my foot, and I'm still having the slowest connection.
Okay, well, we can hear you fine so far. I think your video is lagging a little, but if you wanted to answer the previous questions, and then we'll move on to the current one.
Oh, number 3?
Yeah.
Okay. So a moment of triumph that I had was just really growing up in my family and being the first of 7 to graduate from high school. During those years was a lot of learning, and I mean, it's obvious we're growing up and we're trying to make something of ourselves inside school and outside of school. But I always had trouble doing that and just trying to fit in and seeing where I do belong when it came to social cliques at school. So that was one of the biggest barriers, and that really caused me a lot of anxiety, was just try and fit in and just try and have a friend. And a lot of that was due to the fact that my voice wasn't there of puberty yet, and I kind of was a little delayed on everything. So I kind of outcast of most groups, and it was because I was just trying to learn what's going on and be but going through this and trying to also fit into my family's dynamics of being part Pacific Islander, Samoan, and it was hard because American side, just because that all I really much knew growing up on my body. And so just trying to understand, well, what they do on a daily basis, and any cultural things that I need to abide by, as well as trying to learn the Samoan side of things and understand of where that came from, and the little bit of family that I had to understand of what that culture was. And so it was right around the time I was a sophomore in high school, and it was Vince Vailua that came to Foss, and it was him and another classmate's mom, and I can't remember her name, but they introduced a young youth group called Tatua. And that was just Tatua was means to serve. And that was an opening for me to understand the Pacific Islander side of things and understand what both sides mean to me and how I can be an asset to the family and myself. And so just being able to differentiate between the two cultures and understand it and have barriers of gave me the benefit of being more challenging to things and challenge to life situations, of even just going to school, just because growing up in the high school setting, we were always not too many African Americans and Pacific Islanders will graduate. Most you were going to see out of them was playing in some athletic and past sophomore or junior year. And so having that stigma put on me, as well as me being also trying to find myself and identify myself as being gay, it was just a big challenge.
Oh, no.
Oh, Dev, you went mute.
We're losing your audio.
No, not yet.
Oh,
You're back.
hello?
Yeah. Hi.
Woo! I'm so sorry. You guys, it's gonna be me and the internet again. I know it's gonna be this by the end of the night. But just showing up to school, I'm not sure where I left off at, but I'm pretty sure I left off of just to show up to school and facing that barrier of, was that the part?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Okay. Yeah, so just being able to show up to school and just show my team that I'm willing to learn, even though felt like I had some type of developmental disorder of just, I really wasn't the best onset learner in school. But just showing up and being consistent with myself, even it was the biggest struggle. It was to where on my senior year, day before graduation was being held. I was assignment for
Oh no.
There was a paper that I didn't do because I'm not really good with history papers. I just really learned the aspect of what happened. But I wasn't really good at just kind of putting it on paper, what I learned from that. And so he assigned me that paper that I didn't do. And I had 2 days to do it. And I turned it in, I want to say 2 hours before the end of the day, before we had to go down to the Tacoma Dome to do rehearsals. And sure enough, I did pass that class and graduated.
Yes.
I just want to say,
but yeah, thank you guys.
Okay.
Thank you for being patient with me.
No, it's wonderful. I just wanted to say, oh my gosh, it is so great to be in this space with you. We met in Tautua. That's how me and Devin met. And so I just, wow, 10 years ago. Who would have thought?
10 years, I know, right? Time just flies. And sometimes I really think about everybody and just seeing how they're doing. But some of them I do Facebook, and others I just can't keep up with anymore. Just life happens, and I understand. But I think about everybody, all the events we went to, and it was fun. I had a good time. And it really grounded me into a better person. And Tatua was a group that really helped me mentally after of my grandmother. She passed away of cancer. And they were just really supportive, and they really showed what family was there for when someone does pass, and just being there for you every step of the way. And it was the most crucial time of my life. And I didn't think that it would happen so soon. They were there, and they were just open arms.
Wow. Thank you so much for that, Devin. I also just want to thank all of you again. I think something that's beautiful is that folks who are watching can see, as hopefully a lot of the younger folks who are watching can see that, like, there's some great things that can happen to you if you just keep going and fall into your identity and love everything about yourself. It's not easy, but it is definitely worth it. Um, so thank you all for that. We are going to jump into our fourth question. I'll repeat it for all those who are watching. I expect y'all to bring the heat on this question. That was the whole point of it. As Pacific Islanders, anti-Black and racial trauma shows up in our culture, all of our cultures, just as much as the solidarity and support for Blackness and for the Black community. How do we combat this trauma and keep community accountable? And what do we as PI folks need to do to be better supporters and to stand in solidarity? Um, Maybe let's go with Kevin, and then to Devin, and then to Natia.
Yeah, so I think this question is huge, right? Because it really speaks so much to like this intersection and what our experiences from there can look like. I do first want to challenge the language of the question a little bit. I think
Please do.
since anti-Blackness and racial trauma show up just as much as solidarity, but I don't think that's true. I think it shows up a lot more. That's something that we see happen in a lot of ways, right? So I present very heavily as Samoan, or like people look at me and they're like, "There's a Samoan guy," but it's less often that people are able to notice that I'm Black now that my hair is long and I have tattoos and I'm changing my name. All of these things make it so that when I'm in spaces with other like Pacifica people, they feel really comfortable flaunting their anti-Blackness because they don't recognize it first, right? Like so, for example, a few years back, I worked at a retail store as a security, and I had someone come up to me who was Tongan, and they're like, "Oh, I bet you catch all the Maoli people stealing." And I was like, pause, like full pause, like not okay to say for so many reasons. Also, I'm Black. Also, it's not a word we should be using, right? And I know like Utopia folks have done a lot of work to talk about Maoli and what it means, but even just like these small functions in our language, right? Like when we're calling Black people dark things and not even people, it's a testament to how deeply ingrained anti-Blackness is into the culture. And so I think combating it and holding folks accountable, like the first step is having these conversations. Like there's a lot of things folks they passively just kind of nudge it out. They're like, oh, it's not a big deal. Like that's just the word we've always used, but it's not. It's not the word we've always used. Um, Actually, I got into kind of a large discussion with some of my family members about the word Maoli, and they felt really offended that I would say we shouldn't be using this word. And that spurred me to like just kind of go down Samoan history rabbit holes, try to find out, you know, like, is this something we've always done or where does this come from? And through that, I can't remember the name of it right now, so my apologies, but as a Samoan historian, one of the first in the early 1900s, was writing about terms of abuse in Samoan culture. And so not like bad words, but very bad phrases, worse than bad words, things that you would never call someone um, if you ever wanted to maintain a relationship with that person, right? And one of the things in there was meauli. And I said it is strictly forbidden in Samoa to refer to someone as a thing or as an animal, right? So if we look back on our culture, not far after our first experiences with colonization, people are saying this is not a word we ever call someone. But then we fast forward to today, and people are like, "This is normal. This is okay,"
Mm.
and it's not. And so I think it all starts in that conversation and calling out little things that you see, and from there we can start to acknowledge a lot of our role as Pacifica people in causing anti-Black harm and racial trauma. And I think another thing that Ibo, Natia, and Brandon, you talked about earlier is kind of the multifaceted um, like layers to anti-Blackness, right? So it's really easy to observe overt anti-Blackness in the form of racism, right? We're seeing words being used, we're seeing actions, we're seeing policies, but it's harder to understand like when it is something as nefarious as like cultural appropriation, right? Like so many people are co-opting Black culture. And this happens a lot in Pacifica spaces, right? People are like, oh, I'm from here, that's why I do this. And not acknowledging that the originators of some of these pieces of culture are Black people. right? Like we talked about the Super Bowl show earlier, and all throughout social media, I saw people be like, "This is so big for '90s kids. This is so big for folks who grew up listening to hip hop." Like, no, this is big for Black people, right? Like, if you told, my dad, my uncles, like other people in my family 30 years ago that we would see people crip walking at the Super Bowl, nobody would ever believe that, right? Every one of the performers, every one of the dancers was a Black person. So it was like, while there was some like nostalgia factor for '90s kids, for Black folks, that was a bigger thing. And yeah, by not acknowledging the roots of some of the things that you're taking part of and benefiting from, you're perpetuating anti-Blackness. Right? Yeah.
Thank you for that, Kevin. Devin, would you like to add?
This one was a difficult one for me to answer, just because the wording for it was a little difficult for me. I just would really touch back on just being really aware of the situation of what's going on around you, as well as if you see something, stick up for that person rather than just letting them feel singled out like they're alone. And I think that's a lot of what's happening in most cases nowadays, is that, yes, we are aware of situations that will arise that really, I'm trying to find the word for it. What's the word I'm looking for? Jeez, I really drew a blank. Darn.
Oh, we lost that.
Well,
did you lose me again?
Well, let me take it away for you. Okay. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, great. I would say I'd say call people out. I mean, I think that's just, I'm reading the question as what do we as PI folks need to do better as support. For me, I liked how like my family, I was like, get off your fucking high horse. I was like, and to me, when I see like poly folks who there's a way about them where they think that they're not gonna experience the same type of issues as the Black community, and we're two very different, like we're two different groups of people. I was like, but I'm like, we're still, at the end of the day, we're still people of color. Yeah, I'm trying to think of like my mom, how she grew up in the States. She is someone passing. Most people wouldn't, the discrimination she was getting. She mostly lived in like white spaces, and so just dealing with like the racial discrimination. My dad just grew up in Samoa, so when he's talked about like, oh, like any type of trauma, it's never been like a racial thing, and so just like growing up, it's just always been like it's always just been like a divided house, like. And for me, I just like always like, I'm very vocal about shit. I'm very vocal about like, that's very ignorant when you say something like that. The top of my head, I'm thinking about just like, my ex-boyfriend is Black, and just when he came into like my parents' house, he was not met with any type of just like respect, and nor I wasn't even either. And so it was like, okay, but then I went to my brother's wedding recently, and I brought one of my best friends who happens to be someone, and it was just completely different. Like, they didn't even know he was someone. And then afterwards, my dad's like, oh, he, like, you should invite him more often. You should do this, this, and that. But when it was my ex, I went to the other room, and they're like whispering, like, why did she bring him here? And I'm just looking, I was like, what the fuck is the difference? I just turned off the house, and I'm like, for me, it's like, okay, let me tell you something about your motherfucking selves. I was like, you mean to tell me? I was like, you mean to tell me you're this is not a racial thing? they're like, no, it's like, I was like, you don't know how this man treats me. I was like, I was like, it's a you problem, not a me problem. And again, I be telling him, I was like, get off your fucking high horse. I was like, it's like, doesn't, all I can think about is my relationship because it's like this question was just pissing me off. And I was like, you know what? Here's something. It's just, and I'm not one of those people who just constantly cusses at people or confronts them. Like, let me just set the record straight. But I just feel like to combat it, it's just to go full force. If you see it, it's what Devin just said. If you see it, speak on it, and be about it. Be about what you say. I was like, was that someone? Oh, okay. I was like, yeah, because I think there was that. Gosh, I don't know. I just even with students, I have them and like I don't speak to someone. I can understand like bits and pieces, so I know when they're just the type of jokes they make. And it's just like I was like, that shit is not funny, and I'll say it to them just like that. I was like, it's not funny, it's not cute. And it was like, oh, it's just us, Miss Tia. I was like, well, I was like, don't follow the footsteps of your parents or anyone because it's just a place of just ignorance. I was like, be better, do better. And even if it's like, yeah, it's just they know Miss Tia does not play, especially when it comes to stuff like that. It's like and my parents are like, I don't want people to walk on eggshells if it's always about like it because everyone will say, oh, she always make it a race thing. I was like, well, I mean, I call it how I see it. If it wasn't racing, I wouldn't be calling it out. But hello, what is it, Andrew? So that would just be me. That's just what I do. That's just what I can say. Yeah, for play folks, it's just I see it time and time. Like, it's just what Kevin said. They are taking a culture that are doing things that Black people like started that. It originated from Black people, and to not give them acknowledgement, I was like, don't be a piece of shit. Like, come on now. I'm really nice, I swear. But, yeah. Sorry for missing. Oh, it's okay, Devin. I was just saying that we just need to call people out and just call it for what it is. It's just ignorance. It's blatant racism. And we see it time and time again. I mean, gosh, growing up, my dad was always like, whenever we talked about my mom ever mentioned us being Black, my dad would just shut that idea down and be like, we're not like, my kids aren't. My kids are not that. And then growing up, it's like, like especially after 2020 being the protest, I was like, just being so vocal about it. I was like, I am Black. I was like, and what, Dad? I was like, you got Black kids. I was like, you've been had them for like, 40,000 years. So it's like, but that's just something that I think about when I was growing up, and I was like, gosh, I was like, and then I've had like issues with like friends. They're like, you're Black, and I was like, I mean, I am, but I don't identify as Black. And it's like, and then I think back, I'm looking back at that, I was like, I'm a fucking idiot. I was like, how was that ever that wasn't making any sense? But it's just how I grew up, and I was like, oh my gosh, and then to just like relearn myself, and I'm like, this is really harmful. I was like, I was like, we have to stop this. This is very traumatizing where it's like, we're not getting the full experience of like embracing ourselves. I was like, we're missing out on so much. And it's like, got me all huffing and puffing and shit. I'm like, man.
Thank you so much for that, Natia. Devin, now that we have you back, would you like to answer the question? If we have you back.
I think his brain is frozen. I think just.
Oh no.
Dev, if you want to write it, if you could type it in the chat, I can just speak it out for you.
That can happen as well. But also, I want to thank you for your input, Natia and Kevin, on this question. And thank you for reframing it, Kevin. I think that's definitely a more direct way to put it. Is yeah, anti-blackness and racial trauma exists very pretty heavily in our cultures. Um, I didn't even. I mean, it makes sense now, but that's so true too. Is like I remember having this discussion with my parents, like intergenerationally having a discussion with my parents and my cousins, um, on reshaping the narrative of how we view our black brothers and sisters and siblings, and the discussion with my parents. There might very much the answer of like, well, it's always been that way. And I was like, oh, that's you're not wrong, but like, why is it not okay to update the language? Like our culture is a living culture, as are most all current cultures, and they're constantly evolving, constantly changing, constantly becoming better. Hopefully, all of them. Um, and so, why can't the language, right? Um, instead of saying the word melody, we like it's like kamauli, kengeuli, kanakauli, right? That person, that man, that woman who is black. And so like, and I've had this discussion with my cousins as well. Because we're also just trying to learn our language, and it's easier to learn like the new language that comes in because we're just trying to like gather as much information as possible. But like it's crazy how like the way you framed it, Kevin, is very deep. It's like if you're one who's so proud to be Pacific Islander, then like know your roots, know your culture, know that like this is not a word that like it's historically proven that this is not a word we use, and so that's not an excuse anymore. And like also just our community feeling free to use the N word. For God knows why. Like it's not okay. Just because you grew up in California doesn't mean a damn thing. Then like I don't want to like I'll get off my soapbox, but it just like it's crazy how much of it exists. And again, Kevin, like you said, all the levels that it's like rooted into our culture. And it takes discussions like this, and it takes intergenerational discussions to be able to be like, no, we really need to like get to the root of this and explain like why we shouldn't have to, but explain why this is not right, why we need to be better at being supportive and better at being standing in solidarity. Because just as much as our people want to say the N word, they're also right there celebrating the halftime show. And so if you want to do that, you have to come correct on all fronts. You can't have it both ways. It doesn't work that way. Devin, welcome back. Are you back? Well, please unmute and we'll see if you're fully back.
Can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Yeah.
How are ya?
Am I a little slow still?
You're good for now. But if you're okay, do you want to just move on to the next question? Or do you want to try answering Devin before?
No, I'll go ahead. I'll catch up on the next question.
Okay. But again,
I wanted to add something onto my statement, and just while
yes.
it's like, you guys, I would think that, I mean, for this community, the poly community, PI community, I would say that what needs to be done is like therapy. The push for like therapy and like peeling all of those layers, just to the root. It just goes back to that. I'm thinking about my kids again, and just I have a group of students, friends group, but they all tend to like get on one another for the color of their skin, like, and just like, and like when I'm thinking about it, I'm like, just these families, just like these kids and this community just needs like therapy, and just like on why we think that our skin, like why we think that dark skin is not beautiful. Why we, and because I mean, I asked them, I was like, like one of the kids, she is someone in black, and like her sibling is someone in black. It's just lighter. And I was like, what's the, and she's just not feeling pretty. I'm like, I want you to, like, I don't know how much more I can stress that you are beautiful, like, no matter what, like, as you are. And I think that's so important. And I would push that agenda for anybody. I was like, it's therapy, because there should be no reason why someone doesn't feel like beautiful and just secure with themselves. I was like, it's just learned behavior to just spew that type of hate.
Mm-hmm. Yes, thank you for that addendum to your statement. We love it. So yeah, a lot of really sitting down and having that real education and re-education to help redirect the conversation. So we love it. Let's move on to our next question, which I'm also excited to ask. Even in a room full of your own people, sometimes you do not even feel safe. I'm sure we've all been in those situations. Our panel this evening is made up of beautiful individuals who exist in multiple circles and exist in the intersections of identity. Black and queer, Black and Pacific Islander, Black and young. Why do you think representation of these intersections is so important in the community in general, but also the Black community? And do you have any of these representations that really inspired you? This question is for all, but let's go ahead and start with Natia.
Okay. Well, I mean, I'm just thinking, it's just important because, we're all not one shade. And so I think people tend to, I'm thinking about Kevin and his story about being in security and then just having like that interaction with, Tongan man, just talking, and I'm like, I get those type of conversations all the time without like people like just being so ignorant, and it's like not knowing like I am Black actually, so check yourself. I'm like, and I think that's so important because it's like, what do you like? Why do you feel so comfortable to just say shit like that? I was like, it's just like it matters because these representations are meant to be educational. Like we have to like educate people. Like again, just like not everybody looks the same. Not everyone's like going to be about the same, and it's just yeah, that's like my little telltale on that. I needed to unpack the question more, but I just was thinking of that just firsthand. I was like, being like actually like I back to that bulletin board. The teacher that I got into it with, she just wasn't Black enough to understand why that was offensive, and I was like, let's have a discussion about that. Because I'm not calling you. I'm not saying. I didn't say that you're too Black, too much Black. I was like, what the fuck? Because she was Black, just a Black woman. That was that's like fighting me on this, and I was like, really? And just for my students, I was like, I'm still like, I may like not be like, I may just be like someone like presenting or just, but I'm still fighting for you. I was like, it doesn't matter. Like, I could be 1%. I'm still fighting for you. I was like, yeah, it's just kind of, I lost my train of thought of where I was going to go with that, but I'm just thinking like, I just think me being visible and present gives representation that, my identity is, my identity, and whether you see that or not, and I don't have to explain myself to anyone on why I advocate for the things I advocate. But if if you want to go there with me, I was like, I can tell you what it is. I am Black, and I do support this message.
I love that.
So it's like, oh gosh,
I paid for this sponsorship. No, I totally agree with your metaphor of the shades. Like we're not all the same shade, and that's exactly what I was going to say. Was that the more representation of the types of Blackness that exist, the more that your one Black friend isn't good enough. Right. And so like your one Black friend that says it's okay that you say the N-word or whatever it is that you've decided that this person has allowed you to do no longer becomes relevant because then you know that there are many different types of ways to exist in Blackness and all the different types of bodies that exist in Blackness. There's also this idea that if you invite a Black person to the table, then you've done your work. But how much of that power have you given to that Black person to be at that table, or did you just make the space, right? Like, and that's just not enough. And so, as we build on this idea of representation, that let's say that I'm booked for whatever movie, whatever, I'm putting it out into the universe, and so I'm booked for that movie. But do I represent every Black person's experience or every Black trans person's experience on this planet? Absolutely not. So there does need to be follow-up of what is the next story, or can I have a sibling, can I have a family member or something, right? Like, and so let's not stop at representation, but also finding out the different ways, because we know of all the different Europeans there are and how to distinguish them and all of the stuff. So why can't we know that there are different types of Black folks, different types of Samoan folks, different types of Filipinos, right? And then also another thing I wanted to add about that is that there's this pardon me, I'm losing my train of thought now. Oh my gosh. But there's this idea also that that Blackness is for you to acquire, and the culture of Blackness is for you to acquire and pick up, and it's this badge of honor, and that's not actually what it is at all, right? And it's not just something for somebody to pick up and put on and then take off again or whatever, because there are folks who can't take it off ever. So I think that, yeah, like it's so rough. Like, for instance, Vogue is now tooting that they had their first East Asian woman on the cover. Vogue is 120 years old. Like, at what point are we gonna stop doing this? Like, first Black person to ever, like, that's embarrassing. They're, like 120 years old, and you haven't had an Asian person on the cover. That's wild, right? So I think that there's also this turn that's happening with representation of, now you should be embarrassed that a Black person hasn't won that award, right? Or that is on the cover of your magazine and all of these things. So let's change that. Like, let's continue changing that language of, like, you should be embarrassed if there's no Black people on your staff by now.
That part. Kevin, Devin, anything to add?
I don't think I have anything unique, Ibo and Natia. So well spoken, so clear with it. Yeah.
Right on. I love what both of you had to say. Also, it's important for the diversity and identity to exist, not only for those of us who can identify, but for those of us who can't. It broadens our understanding, it broadens our analysis. So I thank you both for that, those inputs. We're going to move on to the very last question to wrap up our Talanoa. We often hear it said that to center the lives and experiences of Black people. As I said, Utopia Washington is working very hard to build our analysis and to put Black bodies, Black voices, Black lived experiences at the front of our work. But sometimes for a lot of where that statement is being put out, the words, we don't really see those words put into action. A lot of times the instructing of leaning into the uncomfortability, as a lot of us have repeated that term, is just given as an answer. What is your call to action for communities of color? How do you see us centering the lives and experiences of Black people, and what does that look like?
Stop undermining the leadership of Black trans femmes, period. That's my one thing that I want to put out into the world.
Amen. Yeah, if you guys also want to have like a really,
oh my gosh, I feel like it'd be so open, be like, stop being fucking ignorant. Open a book.
Roll down the list.
Gosh, white people call out your white people for the shit that they be speaking. Or anybody, check your friends. Be mindful of the language that you use. you got some trauma, see got a mental health professional, okay? Take care of yourself. Um, I mean, if no one else is gonna go, I think I can keep making I think I can keep going down a list.
Should we do another intermission before you get into it?
No, we're gonna get straight into it right now. Okay, we're gonna wrap this. Yeah, I think what it looks like to me, for right now, like it would look like my board being up and the vision that me and my kids had, and it would look like having support from administrators who say, "Yeah, we agree with you. We agree. We understand where you're coming from, and like we respect that. We don't tolerate it, and we don't let it slide just because it's the last couple days of the month." Um, it looks like it looks like support, and it looks visually beautiful for people to see, and it feels like warm. It feels like a blanket, like of just like a sigh of relief, like you have like that you are loved and valued and just you are protected. Yeah, it also looks like it's storytelling, and your storytelling is uplifted and it's encouraged and it's admired and it's like it's taken in with like the intent to do something about it, to do something like I hear your trauma. Let me be let that be the first priority for me to do, is to support you in any way that I can. Let me like exhaust all my resources to see that you are taken care of.
Yeah, because I know that it's okay to be different and to embrace that difference. Also, like that feeling you are protected. You're fine, Devin. We're all here to speak on your behalf as well to help with that. Kevin, you want to close us off?
Yeah, I think two biggest things for me are listen to Black people, especially Black women, especially Black trans femmes, and Google things. Well, like when it comes down to it, it's so often something traumatic happens for Black folks or to Black people, and people hit my inbox. They're like, "Oh, what can we do? What can we do for Black people?" I'm like, "Go figure that shit out yourself."
Right? What the fuck? Like, oh my god!
There are books and books and books and TikToks and YouTube videos and documentaries. There are all these things, and if you're like placing your guilt at the center of how you want to advocate for Black liberation, then like you're being anti-Black, right? It is not our responsibility to educate you when there are so many resources that exist out there. And the last thing I want to do when like communally I'm experiencing something traumatic is teach someone else what they could do for that. Like, oh yeah, it would be really great if you could Venmo me and then read this book. And I'm like, I don't want to do all that, right? And so if folks need to, I think, recognize that there are already people doing the work. There have been people doing the work, and people will continue to do the work. And so if you are seeking some kind of active role in being a big voice for Black liberation, your first responsibility is to listen to what's already there and push that forward. We don't need like new methods. We don't need new spaces for folks. We don't need white folks to come in and teach us about what's happening or tell their family and friends. Like we don't need to coach all that. Like you need to go out, see what's already there, and listen to that. And that's how you make it so it's not about yourself, right? Like so many folks don't know how to not make it about themselves.
Yeah.
Beautiful, Kevin. Thank you.
No problem. Yes. I'd firstly like to thank all of you for that. I think the beauty, obviously, we're not gonna, and no one is expecting this panel and the information that comes from this panel to solve every single issue and every single problem. But what I hope that the audience takes away, because this is what I'm taking away, is I see 4 individuals who have this each unique lived experience, and each perspective have a different perspective on their Blackness and Blackness as a whole. Um, I think it helps again with what Ivo was saying earlier. Seeing that diversity helps to expand your understanding, but also and as Kevin said, there is so much there already for us to educate ourselves, for us to be able to move forward. If we really do want, if you're about this work, then there are ways for you to go and be about it without having to have Black community members hold your hand through this process. And so I am just grateful for all of your input. I think what I hope is that everyone who's watched tonight follows each and every single one of you individually and the work that you're doing. I've worked with, I think, two of you, or I've been in spaces with two of you, Kevin and Devin. I hope to be in space with both of you very soon. Abel, you gave that amazing performance at the Trans Day of Remembrance, which was fire.
Oh my God, the big letters! I'll never forget it.
Yes, and Natia, you're obviously so woven into the Utopia family, and Kevin and Devin, I hope to be in your presence someday soon. We're gonna make it happen. But before we leave, I just want to celebrate your excellence. I would like for each and every one of you, one by one, to just shout out what you're doing, shout out your affiliations, your organizations that you want to support. I know some of you come from some amazing organizations, and the work that you're doing. So maybe we can go, Devin, we'll start with you. We'll start with you and you can popcorn it. Oh.
Oh no.
No.
Type it out, friend. Type it out.
Type it out and we will.
We'll read it. Maybe we'll go to Ibo.
Sure. So I am a poet, an artist, and educator.
And well, and there was technical difficulties with Ibo, so thank you to our audience. Kevin, would you like to take it away?
Oh, sure. Thank you. Yeah, I just want to quickly say I appreciate y'all for your stories, for your presence, and for this beautiful event. This has been really wonderful. Always love to Talanoa with great folks. Also, a poet. As far as poetry goes, I'm just taking it one poem at a time, one line at a time. So if y'all see my socials and you see I'm a part of the event, feel free to tune in. But no forthcoming books or anything like that. I ain't got Evo status yet. Yeah, also a member of the Pacific Climate Warriors Portland chapter. And it's not a group that I work for, but I've done a workshop for, I think, once. But in Portland, there's the Black and Beyond the Binary Collective. They do a lot of really, really beautiful work for queer and trans Black folks in the Portland area. So those are the big shout outs on my
end. Well, I work with communities in school, the Tacoma Public Schools, Utopia, Washington. I write. I have a blog. It's a lifestyle blog. It's Diary of M, which new blogs are coming soon. It's been a 5-year hiatus, so I'm excited to get back and discuss mental health in my life. And then what else am I currently doing? I am working on a documentary. It's called Fighting Euphoria. It's a documentary about, the euphoria of trans people erasing dysphoria, not focusing on dysphoria. So I'm working on that with my friend Zachary Koletka from Loyola University. So they'll be down next week. So I'm hopeful that I can introduce them to the community that's out here and we can get interviews and just kind of get this ball rolling. It's our big project for this year. So I'm pretty excited. And yeah, that's just what I got going on. You're muted.
Technical difficulties. I'll go ahead and read Devin's portion. Um, Devin is an individual in the healthcare system that is willing to help anyone that comes their way. To love to Utopia for this wonderful opportunity. Thank you, Devin. Thank you, Kevin. Thank you, Natia. I don't know if we're going to get Ibo back, but Ibo is also the housing director for Lavender Rights Project and does amazing work. Like they said previously, they are an artist, they are a poet, they are all the things, as are all the three of you. I'm very blessed by your presence tonight. All of the input and your lived experience that you brought to the table so willingly, to inspire and to inform our community. But also, we can do a lot more to inform ourselves, and that's what I hope that this discussion, this Talanoa, has brought to all of our attention. Um, Again, just all the gratitude for your time and for the work that you're doing in our communities. It's selfless work, it's hard work, but we are grateful for it. And there are little versions of us all over who are going to see it and who are going to be inspired and who are going to be driven to follow in those footsteps. For those of you who are watching tonight, thank you for your time as well. We're all very grateful. We hope you took something away from this Talanoa. And stay in touch with us. If you can't find these amazing folks on Google, like you should be able to, feel free to reach out to Utopia Washington, and we will make those connections for you, because, again, they're doing great work. So thank you all again. I hope you all have a great night and a great weekend. It is Friday. Please have plans to either, turn it up or rest all the way down, however you want to spend your weekend. But thank you so much for your time, and thank you for this very enlightening, very deep conversation that we've just had. Thank you from Utopia, Washington. Have a great night, everybody. Peace out.